Okay. So the title of this, I'm going to be talking about physics on the baseball diamond, but what I really want to drive home is how small the margins are. I think I talked about this in that tech review piece, that so many differences between players come down to millimeters and fractions of a degree. So I'm going to talk to you about ways that we can try and differentiate some of those differences and really get a handle on what makes players play the game of baseball at the very, very top level. As it was said before, I graduated with a PhD in atmospheric science, course 12 in 2018. And my current title, Applied Physicist with the Tampa Bay Rays. I've been with them immediately since graduating. And so that's been just over 7 years now. Let's see. Okay. So how did I get here? Well, let's start at the beginning. I bet many people out here have sort of a really strong impression of some of their very first memories in life. And my very first memory that I have actually has to do with baseball. We went to a Royals game. I grew up in Kansas City, must have been age 2 or 3. I bet we had a great time at the game. I don't remember the game at all, but I remember getting my hand slammed in the car door by my dad on accident when we were in the park or when we were in the driveway getting home. So that's the first thing, my memory stretches all the way back there. That's where it starts, and it's baseball adjacent. And baseball adjacent, I guess, is a way to describe a lot of things I've done in my life. So for undergraduate, I did not go to MIT. I went to Carleton College in Minnesota. I graduated with a degree in chemistry, took that forward to MIT, where I did research on climate, on greenhouse gases, on trying to track and model their emissions and try to understand their impacts on the Earth system. While doing that, I was working with a few friends on some side projects just for fun in baseball aerodynamics and physics with some help from the MIT Sandbox Fund, which we used that money essentially to go to spring training and talk to a bunch of people from a bunch of different teams who all told us, if you want to get the data on the inside, you've got to work for a team. Okay, well, challenge accepted. I went to go work for a team, and our assistant GM, Will Cousins, was actually a postdoc at MIT in mechanical engineering while I was there. We never spoke while we were both there, but I connected with him after the fact, and he was the conduit to get me plugged into Tampa Bay. Why did I end up there? So why Tampa Bay? Why is that where we want to go? So this is a survey of 40 anonymous coaches and executives that was posted in The Athletic, which is the sports focused piece of the New York Times. And in 2025, they essentially put in order the best front office out there is the Los Angeles Dodgers. They just keep winning. They just keep spending money. They're good at everything they do. And the Rays, we came out number 2. We had just missed the playoffs, but we had a strong run of constantly making the playoffs year after year. And people feel like we've got a good process underneath us. You can look at each of these different teams in order of this survey. There are some teams that are not on here at all. You see the Rockies didn't get any votes for being the best front office. But what I've highlighted in green or in teal here are of these teams that have been identified as at the top of their class, which do I think from this list are about the top 10 in terms of R&D, analytics, and strategy across the league? And these, I think it's no surprise to find that the very top of this list, the teams with the most respect around the league, are also the ones that have the most investment and the most trust in their R&D, analytics, and strategy. So let's back this up just a little bit. Isn't this really far from when I studied at MIT? Of course. I think it's natural for people to learn a toolkit of ways to solve really hard problems at MIT. And I feel like that was something I got. I'm obviously still very interested in climate. I'm still very interested in the sort of the world around me and sort of the stewardship of how we can take care of this planet that we're all on. But I also was a huge baseball fan, and getting an opportunity to get on the inside and sort of see what it's like to work for a team, I get to use a lot of the skills that I built throughout my PhD every single day. I'm no longer sort of thinking about nitrous oxide transport and chemistry and thinking about its impact on the planet, but I am thinking about physics, I'm thinking about computation, and I'm thinking about how we can just sew all of this up together into one package and come to a greater understanding of how to play the game of baseball. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that today. But I just want to show a few little highlights of tiny projects that aren't worth sort of going over in full detail. I still get to do some hands-on work like I did in lab. I'm sure some of you have seen this 80/20 aluminum extruded struts. Those are used all over the place in prototyping things that you might use in lab before actually getting something machined to the right specifications. And this year, we're going to have an automated ball and strike system at the major league level where players on the field, the pitcher, the catcher, and the batter can all challenge a strike call that they think was incorrect from the home plate umpire. If they are correct in that challenge and they go back and they look at radar tracked trajectories of the ball to sort of see where it intercepted the strike zone, if the call gets reversed, then the whatever the effect of that was goes through. So a ball gets converted to a strike. The count goes on as if that had happened. And if you sort of incorrectly challenge, I don't remember how many every team gets. It's either three, four, or five. If you burn them all up, you don't have any more. So we're going to see what's going on in that sort of automated ball strike world. But I built a sort of a physical representation of the strike zone that can be adjusted by player height. So that way we can actually see in place on top of home plate what is the rule book strike zone that is now going to be called by this machine. So I still get my hands dirty from time to time, and that was something that was kind of fun to flash back to time in lab. So most of my days these days are actually still behind a computer, though, especially because I'm in Denver. At the end of the 2023 season, had some discussions with people at the Rays, and despite having really enjoyed my time with the Rays, I did not enjoy particularly living in Florida. Apologies to anyone living in Florida or from Florida, but it was just not sort of where I envisioned living more of my life. I was ready to sort of change something, even if that meant leaving, going and doing something else. And thankfully, the Rays were behind me in converting to remote, working on long-term projects, and really being able to not miss a beat by transferring from living in St. Petersburg, Florida to Denver, Colorado. Okay, so that's sort of a background summary of me. We can stop if there are any particular questions there, but otherwise I'll just roll into my first topic. From here, I'm going to talk about three individual, relatively discrete problems that a physics lens can really help understand better the game of baseball that I think in the past, just using statistics, which has been the traditional toolkit for front offices and everyone else trying to work in this space, has really used.
Does anybody have any questions for Mike at this time? Good point. Good. Nobody's written yet, but if anybody has any, just unmute and let's ask them. Okay. See, I have a quick one for you. This is, what's your math? Where did you learn your mathematics? Because clearly your job now means a lot of it. Was it at Carleton, MIT, or after?
It was both. And in all this area, I would say actually my most rigorous run through in mathematics was probably in a lot of the sort of the intro classes at the grad level in atmospheric science. Despite not having done meteorology or like dynamics, there was a whole lot of math that we had underneath us in sort of fluids and atmospheric dynamics. A lot of things that I had to learn on the fly, coming from a chemistry background, I didn't have as much a background in, and so yeah, that's been essentially the story of my life so far in a new space and having to figure it out, not only by myself but with plenty of people there to help.
No
All right,
questions, so go ahead.
yeah. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is a new data set that I think is really interesting. Teams are getting into this, but a lot of this is now also showing up in public places. So if we end up including a copy of my slides, you'll be able to see links to all this stuff, all the places where you can play around with this yourself. What I want to talk about is the evolution of more detailed bat and body tracking. So this opens up a problem where we're trying to take a very noisy 3D time series in what is theoretically a closed problem with a lot of error bars on it to try and understand and describe the game of baseball. So this is very busy. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through every single piece of this, But this is the kind of dashboard that teams and the league are putting out there for people to look at. So we'll go around from the upper left-hand corner and down, and then I'll go through each panel here. So this is one swing by O'Neill Cruz. I believe this was a home run. I'd have to look exactly. I don't remember exactly what the situation was, but you can see that he's catching the barrel of the bat on the ball. You can see by this little speedometer saying that his bat speed at contact was 79 miles an hour, and that's at sort of quite that's the upper limit, close to the upper limit. You'll see some individual swings exceed that. Giancarlo Stanton, Aaron Judge, Shohei Ohtani, some of these players are capable of just putting up monster numbers, but this 79 miles an hour of moving the bat, that's the sweet spot of the bat moving at that speed. At contact is very good. And so obviously it doesn't take a whole lot of computation to know that putting a whole lot more momentum into the bat, into the ball through collision is going to make the ball go a lot further. So that's not particularly a shock that a home run is going to have very high bat speed. You can see sort of a timeline of this bat speed throughout time as it goes from stationary, following this curve up to impact. Going on the right side there, actually Zoom is blocking this. I can't see it. The attack angle, 9 degrees. So that's at the point of contact in the sort of the plane of the bat moving forward. Is it moving upward or downward? So here the angle at that instantaneous moment is 9 degrees upward. So he's sort of in the middle of his upswing at that point. You see the MLB average at that point is 10 degrees. This attack direction or horizontal angle is sort of like sort of even with the front of the plate, what is the direction of the bat at contact? So it's 7 degrees to the pole side. So just basic geometry, we typically expect then for that to sort of be that ball to go toward the pole direction. Generally, if a batter is early and the bat is out front, it'll be more to the pole direction. And if they are late in their swing and the bat is sort of in a negative attack direction, that will lead to the ball getting hit the opposite way. And then finally, maybe some people have seen something like this in golf, but it's essentially if we were to model the entire, at least the last part of the swing, as if it was all happening on one elliptical disc. What is the vertical tilt of the bat? So here that's 33 degrees. And what we found typically is that players up there trying to do damage, hit the ball a long way, have steeper tilts on their path. And players trying to make contact sort of at any cost are going to have that be more flat. It appears that it's maybe easier to sort of aim the bat or have a little more control when the bat is a little flatter. And so this is just one way, all of these numbers together, to describe what happened here. What do these numbers, what is their implication in terms of what we could expect from O'Neill Cruz going forward, or from this type of swing happening on any given pitch? That's starting to get into the realm of what I'm working on, of trying to figure out how do we describe the differences between players, and then how can we take that and potentially learn and make our players better and identify players out there we want to acquire. So with this, as I was sort of talking on the previous slide, what I described there, what I showed there, those metrics are very descriptive. They show what happened on that play. And we can use those, sum those up over a year to describe differences between players. The next piece of this research then is understanding year-to-year changes by the same player. How can we, if a player makes a change, do we think that that's going to be good or bad for them in the next year? Taking that to the next step, within a season, pitch to pitch, within the same game, how can we think about analyzing pitch to pitch changes in swings by one player? Do they have the ability to adjust to different locations? Can they see different velocities coming in? Are they able to deal with different handedness, have a sort of a smaller platoon split than normal? All these kinds of questions, we're hoping that by building up such a large sample and drilling in deep into what we have here, we can better understand how players change on a much smaller scale to potentially adjust and play better over the course of an entire game, seeing multiple pitchers and multiple pitches. Finally, a question that then falls out from this as we think about putting this into models: is any of this normally distributed? I feel like so many assumptions in so many statistical models, especially when you're doing something simple, assume that everything is normally distributed, or transform variables such that they are forced to be normally distributed. Is that a good assumption? If we look at the sort of summary statistics from this bat tracking data provided by MLB, you can see in 2025, two players that I've highlighted, Luis Arias, who is essentially the quintessential contact at all costs hitter, so very little swing and miss, a lot of contact, and Shohei Ohtani, who right now is the best player in MLB. It's not that close, and what makes him so special is that he is a very good pitcher and an elite hitter at the same time. And you can see that there's just daylight between their distributions in bat speed. Is that a good thing? Well, we think obviously Shohei Ohtani can do a lot more damage, hit a lot more home runs, a lot more extra base hits just by virtue of having his average be almost 15 miles an hour larger than Luis Arias' average. So then you look at these, like I said, are these normally distributed? They're kind of pinched at the middle here. And what you can see, especially with Arias, is this shoulder on the left, a very slow bat speed. I won't leave you hanging to sort of quiz you on what you think is going on there. But questions like this, whenever we see a distribution like this, is what is going on there? And it's obvious in the data that Luis Arias has a very different two-strike approach. So he's up there swinging slower with more intentionality, trying to aim the bat at the cost of bat speed, just trying to put wood on the ball and get it in play and see what happens. You can see the dotted line is sort of the league average, and the fact that both of these players occupy so much density on very, very low density parts of the average curve means that we're looking at two quite special players. But each of them arrives at their value to their team in different ways. Luis Arias, I think he may have had a down year this year, but his past 3 years has been this same sort of contact profile, and I think every team in the league would have wanted to have him on their team. There are other things that are available from this data of body tracking that I'm just showing here for your curiosity. You can go take a look at this. I won't go too much into this because I think that this is the kind of data that is probably better used by coaches than the average baseball fan, but we know exactly where these players are standing in the box, both of their feet at all times. So this is Geraldo Perdomo, Diamondbacks player. He's a switch hitter. I grabbed a switch hitter so you could see a player standing in both sides of the box at the same time. You can see he's got a more open stance when he's batting right-handed. His feet are a little more closed off, batting left-handed. What does all of that mean? We don't really know yet. This is sort of an open space that is a lot more about trying to get our coaches the data to answer questions they have about individual players' mechanics and trying to get them into their best position to fire off an A swing, and less about there being global differences between the ways players stand in the box and their results. But all of this is out there. There's all this information collected. And the best thing about this is that none of this existed when I was trying to break in like 2016, 2017. And there's so much publicly available data that anyone could play with this, whether it's your own curiosity or you're trying to break in and trying to work for a team and want a portfolio of real data, real analysis that you've done.
I've got
So,
I've got two questions to be asked.
yeah.
Sorry, I thought normally said I had to wait, but it seems that before we go too
Yeah.
far along, let's see if we can
This
get these
this is
answered.
the last one. I was just going to say
Okay, go ahead
this is
then.
where I'll end this on this that while I've shown a lot of interesting data, most of the data that's the most interesting I think is behind lock and key. So you see here the shadows of this bat behind contact. I think that's actually where the most value is for us to sort of unlock how players develop, how players swing, how they adjust is actually going to be way before contact. And so
Okay,
that kind of
very
information
good.
is not publicly available yet.
I would understand why they want to keep a lot of this under lock and key. It's a competitive advantage. Eric Smith, you've got a question. Would you like to ask Mike? Unmute first, of course.
Yes, I just wanted to understand how the bat and body tracking metrics are measured. I assume they're measured in real time during the game.
They are. I don't know what the latency is for it to get turned around. I mean, it's something like 20 seconds. But these are all camera-based tracking. So it's all markerless motion capture. There are 8 to 12 cameras in every stadium that are all synced on a clock and synced with each other. sent through some sort of processing, some sort of neural net that I know is proprietary. The vendors don't give us that secret sauce. But what we get out of it is a 3D time series. You can see here, there are these white dots on the body as well. So they're tracking essentially with sort of they have a base skeleton of what the human body should look like. They have some constraints that the bat should not be changing length in time. And they're just trying to pull out in position in 3D space all of these body markers. You'll see the head is not tracked. There's no head on this skeleton, and they get the both ends of the bat. I think they actually maybe track a middle part of the bat as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Rio Siono, you have a question?
No, that was more of a comment. I'm a Pirate fan. O'Neill Cruz has a high swing and miss rate, so.
But he hits it a mile when he does when he makes
exactly.
I sort of thought that you'd know who he was. Too much of a Bills fan and not much of a baseball fan. Oh well, boo. Okay, Dick Roy, you've got a question too.
Yeah, thanks for taking it. This analysis is fascinating, and I'm just curious. I played back in the 60s and 70s at MIT,
Yeah.
and I would have loved to have this analysis when I was in one of those things we call slumps.
Yeah.
Have you thought at all about interacting with players? And they have iPads now and they do all kinds of analysis. This would be interesting real-time data for them to analyze. Is that something you have on the plate? Is that something you do? How do you handle that?
Yeah. There are pretty strict restrictions on electronics in the dugout, similar to all of the major sports right now. And so there is no way for us to push something to the dugout for them to see live in the game. So what we have to focus then on is, can we get stuff to people immediately after the game so that if there's a hitting coach, and there's also, I focus on hitting, but there's a lot of this in pitching, and I'll talk about pitching at the end of this.
Well, and fielding. I mean,
and fielding.
The game is very complex.
Yeah. So
Having played and coached for years and years. Yeah. So this is awesome. This is absolutely fascinating. One other question.
Yeah.
How did you get into this? I missed the first 5 minutes. So, what is it that the Tampa Bay Rays saw in what you proposed to them that said to them, this is worth pursuing?
So the Rays, essentially our claim to fame, where we've made things work, has been from the very beginning. We've had much less revenue than most other teams. I would say
Yep.
we're kicking
Small
around
market.
between 30th and 25th in the league. And they've essentially made the determination in the early 20 teens that every dollar spent on people like me got way more value than every marginal dollar spent on free agents. And so we've just built up years and years and years of trust in the process. And around about 2015 to 2018 was where some of the early parts of this data became available. And teams like the Rays saw that as an opportunity to bring in people with a more engineering, physics, biomechanics background and not try to attack this from a purely statistical modeling perspective. And that's how I got pulled in.
Okay. Have you been contacted by the Dodgers yet? They're buying everybody.
I
I happen to be from LA. I was a
Yeah.
Brooklyn Dodger fan, so it's fine with me. But I'm worried about baseball going forward. This is not
Yeah.
scalable what they're doing. And if they, harness this, then they will be unstoppable and that will kill the game.
I don't know if I'm breaking news here to you, but they already have. I think that they're probably at the top of the league in this.
Okay. I was not aware of that because I hadn't seen any press releases on
Yeah.
that particular issue, but I figured you would know. So,
They play
yeah.
things close to the vest. We do as well. Everything I'm showing here is publicly available. And essentially, if it's publicly
Yeah.
available, then you know it's important to teams.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have
Thanks.
several more questions, but I think I'm tempted to maybe let you finish and then we'll stick them at the
Yeah.
end if you can just be patient. Because we don't want to stop you from finishing your presentation here.
I won't rush, but I want to get through everything, and I think that's a good idea. So the second,
Okay, sir. We'll get to everybody in just hold on and go ahead, Mike.
Yeah. The sort of second, I can sort of trim this part because this is just more discussing sort of theoretically physics versus statistics. I've mentioned this before. And the question this brings up is like, do we need to know why if the model we have already works? And I'm putting works in quotations here because sometimes things are very fuzzy. So there is this quotation that I would say that as an experimentalist I believed in for a while, that Ernest Rutherford, an early nuclear physicist, said potentially, I don't know, this could be apocryphal, but it's been attributed to him that if your experiment needs statistics, you ought to have done a better experiment. That's potentially fair in something that you can infinitely replicate in lab. And when you're in the real world, coming from whether it's meteorology or baseball or something like this, you can't ever go back and get the same data again. You have the opportunity to collect it in game. You have the opportunity to collect weather data as it's happening. And once it's gone, it's gone. And so the expiration date of that means that we have to think about ways to use the limited sample we have. And statistics don't have to be a bad word when we're thinking about trying to integrate them with a physical experiment. So here's a problem. Back in the 2010s, especially the early 2010s into the middle part and then the end of the decade, there was this huge swing year to year in home run rates. And one way you could approach this, which I would say a lot of teams did, was when we look back, just put year as a factor in our model, and then the home run rate will just get soaked up in it, and it just sort of come out in the wash. The model will learn that every year has a different home run rate, and we'll just roll with it. That works okay when you're looking back in time, and that is terrible when you're looking forward in time, trying to plan not only next season, but the next 10 seasons of what your team is going to look like. Because if you don't know how the ball is going to move and how to value offensive talent, it's going to be really hard to come up with a structure for the team. So this was a problem that began to become visible, and teams and the public were really interested in trying to explain why this was happening. Changes in ball drag ultimately became what the public really, really focused on. And so all kinds of academics all around the country that were working on not baseball, but were devoting time and money
I'm going
to
to put my
trying to
headphones
explore
in.
things.
So this is my.
This this was this was essentially the leading thought on what was happening here. So in the middle of this time period, MLB bought Rawlings. So Rawlings produces all of the baseballs. They're all produced in Costa Rica, and there were some questions of, even if they're trying to improve QA or the quality of the balls that are being produced and used in game, could there be some unanticipated consequences that are leading to massive changes in how the game is being played? While drag is not essentially, it's not the only reason that those were changing. You can see here, so this is particle image velocimetry from Barton Smith at Utah State. I'll come back to some of these images in a moment. But essentially, has a strobe light, shoots a ball through a tube, like through a dark room with some sort of tracer like fog or chalk or something very fine in the air, and is able over the course of 2 exposures to see how did each of the particles of that tracer move, which then implies something about the circulation and the movement of the air around the ball. And they found that the balls that came from high home run rate years had lower seams and way, way lower drag on the edge of the ball, not only at the seams, but also the grain of the leather. And this didn't fully solve everything, but going back to that question of throwing this into a model, if you now have the ability to measure or at least estimate the drag from watching pitch trajectories or just getting averages from balls that are going through these experiments, you throw that into the model on top of year, and this soaks up, I don't know, 60% of the variance. Now you have a lot better opportunity to plan for things going forward, especially if you have an idea of where the drag might go based on sort of what MLB or Rawlings are telling us. Another thing that's brand new, I'm saying here, baseball meet fire hose. This is just, we're being inundated by all kinds of new data sources that teams frankly don't know how to use effectively. And so when there are people like me that get brought on board, and now we have a vendor that's doing computational fluid dynamics of like wind in the stadium, essentially the wind in the area interacted with the LiDAR scans of the physical structure of the stadium to try and adjust how the ball is going to move, hit on fly ball trajectories in that stadium. There's just only upside for teams that have the capacity to use this data. And I would say most teams probably don't have someone that's able to maybe effectively use information like this. But teams like us, Dodgers, the teams that have the most investment, do. We have enough people around. There's been enough commitment to hiring staff that people can specialize so deeply in trying to harness data like this to get a better understanding of how the game is going to play in any given day, and maybe some strategic choices we'll make in terms of the lineup, the pitchers, things like that. Okay, so that was it. That was it on this segment. So if anybody wants to ask about sort of some of these data sources, the final one, I'm actually the most excited about talking about the final section. So I definitely don't want to leave that out.
More questions before we get too far away from the last part. It's fascinating. Rio, you had one more question about the purple dots. Would you go ahead?
Yeah, I noticed on the graphic he showed for Geraldo Perdomo that there's some purple dots that are kind of in the rear of his rear foot stance. Does that suggest that he's moving his foot more than a few times during the whole pitch to plate sequence, or what kind of conclusions do people make out of that?
Yeah. So players make all kinds of adjustments based on who they're facing, the handedness of the pitcher, the game situation. They'll open up their stance in different situations. If there's a runner on third, they're trying to hit in. If they want to sort of focus more on making contact. So I believe each of those purple dots is the projection of his center of mass down to the ground. So that's showing you where the center of mass was on all those individual pitches.
Okay, so that's his center of mass, not his foot.
Yep.
Oh, I see. Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Alex Breton, you have a question about metrics?
Yeah, I was just curious if there's any information or metrics that either haven't been measured yet or aren't available to you and your team that you think would be super.
Yeah. There are all kinds of things that I think if we had access to information, we would try and do something with. So there are a lot of metrics that we have internally about sort of like how well did players sleep, things like that, that there is so much interest in trying to help them optimize it. But there's a wall up on sort of medical related information that I can't look at that. Only the training staff and people like that can. So there's a whole other world of data that I don't know anything about that I know is helping us make our players better, but it's not being used on our end to make decisions. As far as like strategic stuff, as far as in-game data go, right now it's relatively nascent. The tracking of so there is that body tracking of all the different positions, the joints of the batter and the pitcher. There is not that same resolution on everyone else on the field. Right now, we essentially get the center of mass of the fielders, so we can have that. We can track that. We can track how they move. I think it's only in relatively recent years that we get the more detailed information about the fielders. And so that's a whole other area of research. And it's not up yet on Baseball Savant. I don't think they've determined yet how the league, Baseball Savant is the name of the data portal that MLB hosts for all their information. It's where most of these links will lead you to. I just think there's so much there in terms of fielding that we are hoping to do the most to unlock the way that we feel like we have with pitching and we're starting to with hitting.
Okay, we have a few more questions, but let's hold them until I'll have you finish now.
Yeah.
And we'll hold them to the end. So go ahead.
So I think this is actually the most interesting part, and it's something I don't have anything to do with. Pitching has a long history of essentially having experimental work. So there's just so much instant feedback of adjusting a grip, moving your body, doing something slightly differently, leading to a different result in terms of how the pitch moves, the speed it's moving, where it goes. And that's stuff that you can see in practice, that throwing from a bullpen, pitchers can manipulate that and see what happens in a way that hitting is reactive to the pitch that's coming in and fielding is reactive to the way the ball gets hit. Essentially, as the first mover in that Markov chain of action that is the game of baseball, the pitcher has a lot of control over what happens next. So this is one way. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here, but this is visualizing Yu Darvish's pitch arsenal. He's a player that is well known for throwing many pitches. It says here he throws 8 pitches. I'm sure that some of these pitches he has a huge variation on speeds. So there's this range of how fast he throws his curveball. I would guess he probably thinks he has like 3 curveballs that are slightly different in there. But that's hard to classify, and I don't know how much it does to sort of break it down so finely. But this sort of shows the speed ranges of his pitches. And then over here on the side, it's a little harder to read. You have to link up the colors. So this sort of dark maroon red is his four-seam fastball. But what it shows you is horizontal break in terms of how many inches does it travel left or right out of hand. And so here, this is from the catcher's perspective, it moves toward third base by about 14 inches out of his hand. And it drops about 16 inches from where it gets released. You can see, obviously, the fastballs are moving faster. They have less vertical break. Some of the breaking balls move quite a bit further down. And I'm going to sort of zoom in on a few of these and discuss sort of what has happened in the last year, the last few years. You'll see a pitch type, sweeper here, the second from the bottom, this sort of mustard-colored circle. That is something that is new. Some of these other ones probably seem pretty familiar. This is a new pitch type, and I wouldn't say 10 years ago I would have guessed that there were a whole lot of sort of brand new pitches sitting out there available. So the New York Times posted an article. I think they had an embedded reporter in the New York Yankees dugout who was sort of getting a lot of information. They call this pitcher internally, I don't know if there's a slight difference, but some of them call this whirly. So if you ever heard whirly, that's the same thing. But it is a slider that is thrown with a lot more horizontal break. And so it has very distinct profile, looks very different than other pitches and other breaking balls. And there's a very specific physical reason why. So I mentioned some experiments done by Barton Smith at Utah State. And this is back in like 2018. He was, without doing experiments, theoretically thinking about throwing a pitch such that the speed, the axis that it's spinning on, and then the rate that it's spinning would be such that you could have a persistent sort of turbulent side on one side of the ball and laminar flow on the other side of the ball that then would induce additional movement above and beyond what you could get just from spin alone. So this was his initial sort of theory of how something could work. It was focused on a pitch that was more spinning horizontally, and so sort of a change-up style pitch, and just thought this is how this could potentially work. Well, when you only have theory and don't have experiments, sometimes things don't go quite right. The idea was sound that you could do something like this, but he sort of had it backward, essentially where the different steering forces are, where the turbulent part of the ball would be, where the laminar part of the flow would be, and ended up designing a new pitch in a lab that now everyone is throwing. So this is, like I said, a variety on a slider that we're calling a sweeper. But how this works then got backed up by his own experiments and this particle image velocimetry graphic, similar to what I showed you before with drag on the laces of the ball. If you throw it at such an angle such that most of the time coming around the horseshoe of the laces are in the same spot on the top and bottom of the ball, you can persistently have this tilt in the wake behind the ball, leading to additional sort of downward steering force. This SSW, they've termed seam shifted wake. So the wake in the lee of the ball is shifted and tilted in a direction such that by throwing it at that particular spin axis and the sort of location of the seams on the ball will move additionally because of a change in drag on the surface of the ball, or a change in pressure on the top and the bottom, leading to a sort of this resultant force pushing this pitch down. So how you end up throwing the sweeper compared to a slider is try to impart more side spin yourself, so spin in that sort of the side part of the transverse axis. And if you line up the laces in the correct orientation and throw this, the laces, the tilt of the wake behind the ball will tilt it down and provide the downward motion that still gives it the traditional break of a breaking ball. So they essentially went from first principles, designed this in theory. The theory didn't quite work out, but still worked out well enough to make a new pitch, and now everyone in the MLB is throwing it. So you can see here just pointing out the difference between the slider and the cutter, or the slider and the sweeper that Yu Darvish is throwing. They are similar in vertical break. The sweeper has a whole lot more horizontal break because it has additional side spin imparted from the pitcher. And where it gets its vertical break is mostly actually from that downward tilt of the seam shifted wake. Okay, so that is what I wanted to bring up about that. I just have one final slide, and so I'll just go ahead and post that, and then we can discuss anything anybody wants to talk about. The last thing I was just wanted to bring up: what can you do with all this? How can you watch baseball like an applied physicist that works for MLB? The first thing is, do you want to break into the sports industry? If there's anyone here that's thinking about this, there's a wealth of public data available that was not available for me when I was breaking in. And other sports are getting into it as well. So NFL has this huge competition on Kaggle where they release a shared data set and they get teams of students, they get teams of independent people to put together analysis. And then they get to, at the end, the finalists present in front of league executives. The other piece that I have here, do you want to enjoy watching the game? My advice to you is just sit back and watch. There are generational talents playing right now. And I actually prefer the experience of sort of turning off my brain of thinking about physics when I'm at the game. Take it in, enjoy it for what it is, and know that every team is doing everything at their disposal to win, while MLB is trying to put on the most entertaining product they can. And sometimes it's a little absurd. Interesting things will happen. Rules will change. My advice is just be entertained by it. Here's my well-worn Rays hat that I wear all the time. It's this sort of mesh trucker hat we had at spring training. And for those of you that are real baseball fans, my second favorite hat I have, my Montreal Expos hat with a 1994 World Series patch on it. Most of you that are aware of anything in baseball will know that the 1994 World Series was not played because of the strike. And that's why I find that such an interesting piece of history. It's absurd that I should have a hat like that. The Expos might have won the World Series, but it didn't get played. And sometimes, every once in a while, I'll wear that around and get a question from a fan. So that being said, just be a fan of the game. But there are so many different interesting ways to look at the game, and I hope that I was able to give everyone here a peek into sort of what we're working on in front offices.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And now we've done for the questions, which have been piling up a little bit. Yeah, a lot. First question from Doug Ruby. Actually, pardon me, I don't know much about baseball, so this should be an interesting question. Go ahead, Doug. You there?
Bob, somehow you ended up muted.
No, oh, thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good.
Can you hear
let's
me
try
now?
this again. Doug Ruby, do you have
Yeah.
the operator error here? Doug, do you have a question for Michael?
Yeah, I did. Do you have any historical data on the batting information for Big Poppy? And the other question is, what do you think of the knuckleball?
Yeah, so unfortunately, this bat and body tracking starts in 2023, so we don't have that for Poppy. There was a lot of change in the data that we collected going in from 2019 into 2020, so there is some going backward, but unfortunately none of this like really interesting body position, bat speed. I would love to sort of see what we could get from that. It's possible you could recreate some of it from video, but the problem that we run into is how do you extract 3D data out of a 2D video? And that's not a trivial problem that I don't think anyone has solved very well. So unfortunately, some of the best players there, it's sort of lost to the sands of time. But yeah, I wish we had that. And what was the second question again? I'm sorry, I was focused on the first one.
Oh, it was, what do you think, or do you have any data on the knuckleball?
Oh, knuckleball, yeah. There's a reason that teams have moved away from that, and it is because the knuckleball ends up being very unpredictable. Essentially, I think there's a lot of within game correlation with how the pitches go, and what I mean by that is when a knuckleballer is on, they're on, and when they're off, they're off, and it's hard to pencil in someone to make a start as a knuckleballer these days, knowing that when they're off, they're off. And that wreaks havoc on the way that modern bullpens and starting rotations are managed. These days, most teams have five starters. They have a just wealth of one inning relievers and just maybe one or two people in the pen that can could like throw mop up duty if a game gets out of hand. And yeah, it makes it hard to consistently employ a knuckleballer. I think there may be two right now in the minor leagues that are trying to make it through, and someone could break through. There are some great knuckleballers throughout history, but it is a lot harder, I think, to make a consistent living as a pitcher, having that be your main weapon.
Okay. Okay, good. By the way, we got 15 messages. I'm not sure they're all questions, but there's quite a long list here. Stan Thompson, you've got a question?
Yeah, it's my favorite go-to question to get to a subject matter expert, and that is, in your field, what is the most surprising or puzzling result you've come across?
Yeah. So when it comes to that, I would say that our very first attempt at trying to just throw this sort of bat velocity into a model and essentially see, okay, does that correlate well with results? There are different ways you can look at this and break down essentially player seasons and their average bat speed and see that there's a negative correlation that the harder you swing the bat, the worse your results were. And that's something that's really sort of hard to sort of wrap your head around sometimes. And it gets at this sort of question of how do players get to the same place? So you could imagine I was getting at this with sort of discussing what's behind lock and key in terms of what's not publicly available yet. But essentially, what's not publicly available yet was not available to teams a small handful of years ago. So we were looking at sort of just everything that was happening at contact. And there are way different ways to get to the same amount of power, to get to the same bat speed, get the bat to the same position. So you can think about somebody just completely selling out, no control of the bat, essentially this like uppercut swing with no control, versus somebody that is getting to their bat speed from sound mechanics, good physical conditioning, and it really led us to the sort of the kinds of work where we're trying to zoom in more on a pitch by pitch level and trying to understand the good and bad ways that you can get to something that we thought was just a universal good in increasing bat speed.
Okay. I'm going to ask everybody, if you haven't taken a look at the chat, take a look at it because there's some things are just comments, not questions, and they're kind of interesting. So while you're listening to Mike, you might want to scroll down. Rio, you've got one more question to ask about the Rawlings.
Yeah, I don't want to monopolize the questions, but I had a question. You kind of explained about launch, and looking into drag for launched balls, batted balls. But has that been applied to, how pitchers pitch? And you hear a lot of talk about increased spin rate. Has that been applied to any, cast any kind of theories or conclusions about increased spin rate? Is that how people are coached, or is it both ball and coaching?
Yeah. So drag, I won't say that drag doesn't have an effect on pitches. It certainly does. Drag essentially will give a breaking ball more time to break, and so the effect of spin then gets sort of magnified the more that it slows down over the trip from the mound to the plate. The effect of drag is a lot more pronounced on fly balls. So a ball that's hit at 400 to hit 400 feet, and essentially maybe the drag is ball to ball or year to year is like plus or minus 1 to 2% of the distance that ball is going to travel ends up actually mattering quite a bit because 410, 415 feet is going to be a home run in most parks to most parts of the field, whereas 385 feet is going to be landing on the warning track and probably in the glove of a fielder a good portion of the time. So just by virtue of the distances being different, drag it is more visible, I would say, to most fans and in most cases on fly balls. But it's definitely something that we've taken into account. And to the extent that we can estimate essentially the annual or like our current drag situation, it's possible that maybe that leads to some slight changes in pitch mix in terms of like the ratio of fastballs to breaking balls that a particular pitcher might throw in a game. What we don't necessarily want to do, I think that in a lot of these cases, trying to get a guy to adjust their mechanics to account for something like drag, I think that we would typically find that the loss of consistency by having a player try and adjust something on the fly is almost always going to work out poorly, increases injury risk, increases inconsistency. And so drag is something I think we typically just kind of roll with on the pitching side.
Okay. Alan Turner, you got a question, actually, a good one.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if teams or you are looking into different bat shapes and sizes and weights, and especially with all the torpedo bat talk in this last season.
Yeah. Um, I take a slightly different approach on this. I actually end up taking a relatively like quote traditional baseball approach on this. And that's that like in cases like this, I think that the Yankees and plenty of people around the league and in public situations have essentially found that there's not much of an effect. It's not going to do a whole lot. It might move the needle a very tiny bit for a small number of players. And where I land on this is if swinging a torpedo bat makes you more comfortable, probably the gains psychologically of being in the box and not thinking about your bat and just swinging away, that's probably worth way more than trying to optimize anything that the bat shape could be. Plenty of guys are swinging a bat that is too heavy or too light for them. And there might be some trade-offs in terms of making adjustments and trying to find something that's just as comfortable, or maybe potentially more comfortable, and they just haven't tried new bats, or they're stronger, or they're less strong than they were. But that's something that there are quite a few things that probably happen in the game of baseball. It's a notably superstitious sport. People are superstitious at all levels of the game, and while you might think it's silly, and I often think some of the things are silly, if they're making someone feel comfortable and locked in, I think that we would actually say that that's probably net good.
Okay. Eric Smith, you've got a question?
Yeah, hi, Michael. Another question. You were looking at the year-to-year variations in home run rates and talking about the drag variations and slight variations in drag. And my question was, did anyone pay attention to the bat ball collision metrics like coefficient of restitution and other things that might explain variations?
Yeah, so that was another piece of it. I would say that between the coefficient of restitution of that, especially there there are people that come out with different ways of sort of thinking about that with the bat. Um, Ultimately, there's probably not a whole lot of difference in the hardness of the bats, especially like year to year. I think guys end up playing with the bats they prefer, ash, maple. But the ball itself, there were a lot of questions of like, so if anyone's ever has never seen a baseball sliced in half, it's a rubber core, and then it's very, very tightly wound, very thin string, and then there's another layer on the outside that is much coarser, white string to give it all of its sort of the rest of its diameter. And then it's two horseshoe shaped pieces of leather that then are hand stitched without red laces. And there was a question of, are there maybe persistent changes, like I said, in the in the spirit and in the name of increased quality and quality control and consistency that might have led to sort of differences in how tightly wound that string was. And if that's going to be more tightly wound, then there's going to be an increase in that coefficient of restitution of essentially what the ball was bringing to that bat ball collision. And so I think that was another piece that there were some public researchers out there, Meredith Wills being one of them, that were cutting up baseballs and looking at that of like how tightly wound, what is the essentially the diameter, the whatever the width of the string that's being used, all these different ways to show that that certainly had an impact. And then what we can see in all of that, potentially in response to this, was in the name of uniformity, going from just cores having a humidor to all 30 teams having their balls held in a climate controlled environment. Now, it wasn't necessarily humid the way that the humidor in Colorado is, in order to essentially soften the balls up to make up for the fact there's so much less drag in the low air density up here at altitude. But there might be consistency that then led to some changes, some net changes across the league that were making the balls harder and therefore leading to increased fly ball distances, which then led to home run rate increases.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to.
At least they didn't have to worry about inflation pressures.
Yeah. This year, the NFL has gone to a different system. Now teams are bringing their own balls, and there's sort of a controversy on kicker balls now, on the inflation rate, and then also the sort of like how scuffed up and the condition of the K balls, as they call them. So if you want to dive into Deflategate 2, look into NFL K balls.
Okay, I'm going to skip over comments that aren't questions, and if we have time later, we'll go over them. But I know that Jim Boyd wants to keep us pretty much on track here, so we got about six more minutes. So, Mike, you have a question, Micolucci?
Yeah. So I'm curious to hear more about the sweeper. If I understand correctly, that was developed in a university lab, and somehow, how did it make it from the university lab to actual use? Was it like research people like you that recommended it to teams? Was it pitchers that were reading university papers?
Yeah. So, I don't want to say. I don't want to say that this pitch came 100% essentially out of university research and Barton Smith and Alan Nathan and others that have been working on this. I think that for a while, so there's the 4-seam fastball, there's like a 2-seam fastball. Players have been experimenting with, I think, what they were calling a 1-seam changeup or something like this. That's close to this, just a different sort of spin axis. So the idea of essentially getting a different spin profile, but still a movement profile that they wouldn't expect from the spin, like that has been out there for a while as people are out there tinkering with different things, throwing all kinds of weird pitch grips, fork balls, everything under the sun. But I would say that this got the attention. I would guess that the pipeline of this sort of seam shifted wake and the sweepers went from this kind of research being done by Barton Smith to, I would say the next step was not teams necessarily, but there's a whole exploding cottage industry of driveline baseball and all these performance labs that are working with players in the off season. And I think they're just constantly looking for what is on the absolute cutting edge that they can, essentially use to get clients to come in, and then, we'll teach you this stuff and maximize your chances of being an MLB player. I would say it was from there, then people leaking back from Driveline and other labs like that to teams that was getting the attention of pitching coaches, getting the attention of player development staff. And it sort of made that jump. And essentially when the cat's out of the bag in terms of a competitive advantage, MLB, like many professional sports league, is a copycat league. So everyone wanted a piece of this and found that there were really good results, especially early on. And then what you see, it's the leading edge of any change that gets put in place. At the beginning, people were throwing good sweepers because they found that it was something new to them. Batters weren't ready to see that. They weren't expecting the spin that was coming in. And now there are players out there that are throwing bad sweepers. It's just like fastballs. It's just like changeups. Things go on, and it becomes business as usual.
I have a question from Iobi Ito. Actually, it was in the question and answer. Do you want to ask it, or if not, I can read it here.
Yeah, I can ask it. Thanks, Michael. So I'm 2010, core 16. So I'm really curious about the pitch part of it and active development there. You showed that like 2D cluster of the different types of pitches there. Is there like a known envelope that of pitches that are like physically viable, like whether you combine like the fluid mechanics aspect plus the biomechanics as constraints? And if so, can you kind of combine that with the batting data you have to perhaps isolate a subregion that would minimize batter success and kind of emphasize your development there?
Yeah, I mean, you're getting at, I think, one of the problems that we're really trying to crack on both sides. So from the hitter's perspective, like how do we take, so the first part of your question, yes, there essentially is a sort of region of expected break, of speed. Every once in a while it gets broken. Like I said, the sweeper didn't exist 5 years ago, or at least it didn't exist in this discrete form. Players were probably throwing a slider in between that had a larger range. Something else you can do is sort of like the arm angle that you're coming in at, the submariners versus the sidearm guys, three quarters over top delivery. There are even a few players that are throwing at this sort of like passed over top, which looks very weird, the ball coming out of the hand like that. So obviously that's going to have an impact on where the ball is coming from and essentially where it breaks from there. The movement that it makes is going to lead to a different location where it will end up on the plate. So just by virtue of that, I mean, if you're throwing you can't throw a pitch that's going to break away from the plate and aim it essentially on that side. You'll throw a ball that's three feet outside of the zone. You're getting at a game planning perspective of us trying to understand everything we can about pitching, everything we can about hitting, so that our hitters are as prepared as possible for the pitches they see, and our pitchers are prepared as possible to attack the hitters in a way that we think they can't hit. So yes, that is exactly the kind of problem that we're working through right now and trying to work on how to relay to our players to make the best strategic decisions, even if they aren't maybe necessarily tinkering with their own pitches or changing what they're doing.
Okay. We're getting a little bit hurried now, but Alex Berton, you've got a question?
Yeah, I was just curious, what you think the best way to balance, new school analytics and kind of old school conventional baseball wisdom.
Yeah, I think if I had to say one thing in that, I would say the best thing that a team can do is bring on a coaching staff where everyone is honestly intellectually curious about how to play the game and how to improve their players. I think that a lot of teams end up, this is less now than it was 5 or 10 years ago, but it can be very attractive to bring in a coach or bring in someone that essentially says, I know how to do this, I'm going to change it. And I think teams these days, it's just so specialized, the hitting coaches, the pitching coaches, everyone involved, all this information, that the profile that teams are looking for are, I want to chase down my hypotheses with the data we have and try and update my understanding of the game of baseball to meet all the experience I have and all the things I've learned with what we now know is actually happening, or a better way to describe what I can't see with my own eyes. So the sort of pitch movement, there's stuff here where we can see the difference between pitches, and just naked eye trained baseball people can see what like a good and a bad slider looks like even from the same player. But what you can't see and what's very difficult to see are those like the changes that happen in a swing on the order of 10 milliseconds. We're talking like 80 milliseconds before contact, very slight changes in position, angle, velocity. You just can't see that. And so while you might have an understanding or sort of a prior assumption of how we can develop players and make them better, arming them with all that information, and especially the ability to give feedback, especially in practice, but in day after of the games, and then have coaches that are intellectually curious and want to use that information. I would say that's probably one of the biggest ways to get the most out of this now, without all this information just living up in the front office, and not getting down to the field.
Okay. Jim, I don't know how we're doing, but you've got a question here, and I'm saving it for the last, so you don't cut us off.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. No, I didn't. No, not yet. ENIAC has a question which might have a quick answer to it. If you're still on, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, in your opinion, who you thought the greatest pitcher of all time is. We all have our opinions, but I wonder what yours is.
I mean, for entertainment value, I know he wasn't aiming for the bird, but seeing Randy Johnson hit that bird in spring training in the middle of the flight of the ball, that was something special. This is where I just wish we don't need all the biomechanic data, but I wish we had so much more information about like Nolan Ryan. I'm sitting here thinking like, on his pitches, they were talking about them hitting like 110 miles an hour, or maybe that's exaggerated, but unlikely that it was topping out like that. But I would really like to know. And then, I think that seeing elite pitchers, even with a very short career, I think that there's a lot to be said for how brightly like Sandy Koufax shone in his brief career, relatively brief. I mean, it's not like it was 1 year, but being sort of cut short by injuries, what could have happened there, and what the Dodgers could have looked like throughout all those years. I'm not sure I have one name to pick from, but there are so many names that are out there in history that I just wish we could be able to look at a little closer with a little bit more information like what we have today.
Thanks. Scotty Thyman, no, Scott Thyman, I guess it is. I hope I got that right. You've got a question about data. Still here? Okay. He was asking, is there data correlating the hitting with the position of the bat and the ball at the same instant during the swing?
Yeah. So, if I'm understanding the question correctly, we have very detailed tracking of where the ball is. We have very detailed tracking of where the bat is. There's a little bit of experimental sort of noise around that exact position, but we're getting very good at having a pretty precise understanding of exactly how the bat and the ball collide and what that implies in terms of what happens next. And so it's interesting to be able to essentially, without knowing exactly where the quote sweet spot should be on the bat, you can actually back it out of data from how fast the ball comes off the bat in different locations when we see exactly where the impact happened.
Okay, that's good. Okay, Jim, finally to you, because you get to wrap it up too. There were some other comments on it. If people want to hang around afterwards, if Jim will let us, after we formally closes the meeting, we can have a little discussion, but I think we've gotten to most of the big ones. Jim, it's up to you. Before he does, though, Michael, I want to say thank you very much. It's a fascinating presentation. Jim, it's all yours. Jim Boyd.
Yeah, so Michael, first I had, kind of a final question kind of about your profession. And so really part A is this sort of a full-time year-round job for you? And then my second is, do you have counterparts on other teams? Does every team have a physicist, and do you have any interaction with any of them?
So first question, this is year round. I would say the off season is actually where we do some of the most important work because there's not the time pressure of turning something around tomorrow or next week in terms of our operations. So the off season is actually where things maybe go more 9 to 5 in terms of the day, but the window of time that we're thinking about really expands. We're thinking about long-term stuff. We're thinking about how to plan for the future and doing the kind of work that's harder to do when there are operational pressures. Me personally, I'm essentially all long-term projects, and I'm doing some things to support some of our day-to-day. But I get the luxury of being able to really think with a longer lens most of the time. Are there other people like me on other teams? The short answer is no. There's nobody else with the title physicist anywhere in their title. There are people, I would say, on a few teams that probably come from a more sort of physics-based background or are thinking about the game in this way, but that may not be close to all of their responsibility. And I don't think there's anyone out there right now that has essentially the long-term project focus in this area that I do. So yeah, I think I'm relatively unique when it comes to the league. I would not expect that to be this way forever. I'm sure there are plenty of people on the Dodgers that have some experience in this area, but no one quite so specialized in terms of being close to 100% of their daily work, probably.
Okay. All right. So as Bob said, we're going to wrap things up now.
Yeah.
Thank you. This was probably the most engaging topic we've ever had. And I think we could probably keep you here for hours, but I promised you we wouldn't do that. So thank you, for sharing your path to the big leagues. As we all know, hope springs eternal with baseball. And for me, anyway, it's just what I needed to hear about on a cold, wintry evening here in Western New York. So just an upcoming event. Our next event actually sticks with our professional sports theme. Professor Eric Blackman is an MIT alum with degrees in physics and mathematics. He has a PhD in theoretical astrophysics, and he's now a professor at the University of Rochester. His research is primarily directed towards astrophysics, but a side research project of his is the study of traumatic brain injury, and specifically the role of helmet protection both in military application and sports applications. So NFL helmets, for example. So Professor Blackman will join us on Wednesday, March 11th, to share his research including his modeling of the physics behind traumatic brain injury. So details will be posted on our Club of Rochester website and on the Central Alumni website. And I hope to see a lot of you there.
Okay.
All right. So good night, everybody. And if a few of you want to stick around for another couple minutes, Michael might be able to chat with us.
Yeah, I'm very good. Yeah, thank you, Michael. By the way, we did mention that we send a token gift of a couple of club wine glasses to our speakers, and we'd like to send you a couple. So I'll do it by email, but get an address you'd like us to ship it to. Just a small token of our appreciation for talking to us.
Thank you.
Speaking with us. Okay, and with that, I think that there are enough people, few enough people that I just asked people to unmute who want to ask make a question or even make a comment. There are a lot of very good comments.
I'm going to sign off,
anybody wants to start a debate,
Right.
Go ahead. Everybody else is free to leave or stick around. And very good. Good time.
So, Michael, do you go down to spring training at all, or do you just stay in Colorado?
So I've been here since end of November 2024. So it's only been one full season since I've been remote. I went down to Florida 3 times last year. So our annual department meetings we usually hold in January. So I was just there last week as well. I will probably go down for either spring training or for around opening day. This will be sort of a special opening day because we played our 2025 season at George Steinbrenner Field in Tampa, their minor league spring training park, because Hurricane Milton tore the roof off Tropicana Field. The city repaired it. The repairs should be in place. They may not be 100% done with all the internal office space and everything, but the field, the seating areas, and all the fan-facing areas should be repaired and ready to go by, I think, April 8th or whatever our opening day is. And I might try to go to that instead. It'll be great to sort of be back in the Trop and see a game there. It's sort of, some people think it's a dump, but it's our dump and we're protected of it. And there's something to be said about being indoors and being able to walk down the hallway and all of a sudden be in a major league game.
Very good. Does anybody else have any questions or comments for Mike?
Yeah,
Go ahead, Tom.
I raised the point, it's kind of a philosophical issue. Imagine this data collection of yours works well, and you find the best way for a hitter to hit the ball, and then you find the best way for the pitcher to pitch the ball, and everything else. You load that into a bunch of robots, and what happens to the game of baseball?
Yeah, that is that does feel like that is a, you can imagine a dystopian world where we're sitting here in, 2126, and what does the game of baseball look like? There are the more mundane questions of is there going to be a lockout at the end of the 2026 season? Is that going to hurt the game? So I would say that, just you wait. It's possible that something will go off the rails before we get to that point. But yeah, that is a question, and if people, there's a fine line in some of the questions of what the future could hold. Like right now, a player tears their UCL and they end up getting a repair, Tommy John surgery. So that's either usually a ligament pulled out of either somewhere else on their own body or a cadaver, and it's sewn in there. And just imagine that we sort of decide, why are we harvesting ligaments from a cadaver when we can just have a bionic arm here? We can recreate the elbow and make it perfect. Now we're getting closer and closer to what you're talking about, and you can see the path to those kinds of questions can be paved with the best of intentions, especially for the health of players. So I don't know. I don't know if we're ever going to see that, but it's entirely possible that the game is relatively, it's fundamentally like you go back 100 years and see what people are playing in baseball, and you can interpret there are some differences in how the game gets played, but it is legible as the game of baseball then as it is now. And will that be the case in 100 years? I don't know.
Okay. Jenny, you get your hand up. Speak up.
So I have a comment and a question. I apologize if you already covered it since obviously I joined late from driving. But given like MIT apparently has some people like you who are applying their quantitative talents to anything from sports consulting, from playing blackjack and casinos to the Moneyball movie for baseball or any other sport. I'm curious if you already covered like because I heard someone mention Dodgers
Hmm.
and then also favorite pitcher because Shohei Ohtani is getting a lot of limelight for being both the best or one of the best pitchers in baseball. And it would be interesting if there's data to look at how he is able to do that and to see if there are ways to replicate that or enhance that, obviously.
Yeah, I think there are a few things here. I mean, one is that it just there's not anyone else right now in the conversation that's playing today that I think can be able to claim the title of being the best player playing right now because, like I said, he is at the very top of the game in terms of being a hitter, and he may not be. There are pitchers that are better than him in the game, but the fact that he can provide so much value on both sides of the ball and in the same game pitch very well and then hit 3 home runs in the playoffs. Um, Part of that is, if we're looking for one in like 10 million, 100 million freak athletes out there, there are probably people all around the world in different parts that would be able to play the game of baseball very well. And just, we're traditionally the scouting areas in terms of where the game exists right now are virtually anywhere the United States has ever had any sort of military presence. So Japan, Korea, a lot of the Caribbean. There's a little bit in Europe, but it's not huge. And that's about the end of the world in terms of players that are being evaluated. And so the Dodgers, one thing that they do well, of many things they do well, I think, is they have just so much extensive embedding in other parts of the world, especially in NPB in Japan, KBO in Korea. There are players that come from the league in Taiwan. The name of it's CBPL, I think. There are all kinds of places around the world that teams ignore at their own peril. And there are plenty of teams that essentially just have no presence right now at all. in the Caribbean and Latin America, and essentially are just like, we're going to run our team through the high school and college draft, and to their detriment, they're missing out on, a what is ultimately a small fraction of everyone in the world that could play baseball, but they're missing out on a huge portion of the places where baseball is an institution. So the Dodgers are
Doug?
great. They're great at everything, and everyone wants to be the Dodgers, but everyone hates the Dodgers.
Yeah.
Not
Doug, I think you had
me.
your hand up.
Hang
Oh,
on.
okay, Dick, go ahead.
Hang on there. Yeah,
Tim,
I'm
go
a
ahead
Brooklyn
first, Dick.
Dodger fan. Quick question for you. The massive amount of data that is obviously being collected, you have access to, begs the question of AI. Why
Mhm.
not ask Gemini 3 to come up with another pitch? Have you tried that? And if so, what response did you get? I'm about to try it actually.
Yeah, you should. I have not tried
Uh,
that. So with these generative AI models, right now, they are very good at doing some specific tasks, and they're getting better, but they're bad at math and they're bad at physics. Essentially, the training set that they know their math and their physics on is people asking for homework help on Stack Overflow and Reddit. And that's just not, it leads to a lot of answers. It leads to a lot of volume of data to suck in and try and understand what's going on. But there's not the relational piece of actually putting together the rules that govern how this works. It's essentially, I've seen this exact question asked before or something similar. I can plug in different numbers and get it the right answer. So I don't know what it would say. It might say something to the effect of exploring some of these other spaces that are in sort of
Options, yeah.
speed and vertical brake and horizontal brake. But the question is anything that gets proposed actually feasible? Is it physical? Is it something that you wouldn't tear your UCL trying to throw? I don't know.
Well, the beauty is you can actually just start to throw it. Anybody
Yeah.
who knows how to pitch
Yeah.
can say, "Oh, I can hold the ball like that. I know how to impart that spin.
Yeah.
I'll just go out and try it."
Yeah.
You know? And your sweeper example is classic. Nobody had tried that before, getting those seams in exactly that position and employing that vertical spin, and all of a sudden you got a brand new pitch.
Yeah.
I mean, it's stunning. So there's probably something more out there.
There
And,
certainly is. There
yeah,
certainly is.
yeah. So, in any
Let me
case,
interrupt.
it's awesome. Thank you so much for this. This
Yeah.
was a, and go Dodgers. I bleed blue. Sorry, but
Uh,
the last
We'll
couple
hear
of
more of
years
that
have
in a
been
minute.
really great.
We still got a couple of people that have been very patiently waiting with hands up, and the longest has been Doug Ruby. So go ahead, Doug.
Thank you. Yeah, I asked a couple questions about the relative importance of the Magnus force
yeah.
versus the drag on the seams and how that reflects the amount of curvature of this pitch as well as how does it affect right-handed versus left-handed pitchers?
Yeah, for the most part, pitchers will. So let's see. Yeah, you Darvish is a right-handed pitcher. So this screen right here, you can essentially just flip. You can just mirror this image in terms of the horizontal break, and it'll give you the same thing for lefties. Now, there are. This is where it gets into some like weird territory. There's not a physical reason for this, but left-handers throw different pitches, not because they're incapable of it, but just because the population of the world so much favors right-handers. So many hitters see right-handers so much more. And this sort of like lefty on lefty matchup is something that still defies exact understanding of why left-handed hitters struggle so much against left-handed pitchers, but it probably is just simply throughout all of their career from t-ball to little league to high school to college to wherever, they're just seeing so fewer good left-handed pitchers, so all of a sudden they show up in the minor leagues and getting blown away by that. So there is actually, despite the ability of pitchers to just mirror this and throw the opposite horizontal break depending on their handedness, there's actually just a lot of inertia that comes from like the selection of these pitches that have traditionally been thrown by different batters. I think that like lefty on lefty changeup is something that very rarely happens, and that's sort of where it's not shown on here. It's not thrown very frequently, but sort of a screwball as being the opposite orientation of the of like a cutter sort of breaking the other way. Sometimes that would get thrown in such a way that maybe you're trying to intentionally run it in on the hands of a batter. I don't know. That gets to sort of the game theory of like how much do you want to try to aim at the hands of the hitter and potentially run the risk of throwing a hit by pitch. So that gets, there are all kinds of ways you can take this that then I'm sure every pitcher and every pitching coach has a different thought on. And then the other part of like, I did this to you on your first question. I forgot I forgot the second question your first time. Um, where what was that second part?
Oh, it was the relative importance of the Magnus force
Magnus force.
versus
Yeah.
the drag
So
on. Yeah.
I would say explicitly calculating it is not something that, whether it's due to this sort of seam shifted wake or whether it's due to the Magnus force is different. As the sort of like practical knowledge that the pitchers and the pitching coaches have is that transverse spin, so like in the direction sort of like top spin and side spin will affect the movement of the pitch, and gyro spin, so when it's spinning in the plane of the direction of travel, is not what they call active spin, and that component of spin is not reflected in the Magnus force. So they essentially know intuitively how to manipulate the amount of Magnus force being applied to the ball just based on this sort of, is it side spin, is it top spin, is it gyro spin? So that's not something that we necessarily spend a whole lot of time explicitly calculating, but that is that's one of the biggest driving factors for how the pitches move based on the orientation of the spin.
Okay. Alex Breton, you've been very, very patient. Your turn.
Sure,
I think
yeah.
this might be the end of it too. Go ahead.
You mentioned 2020. I was wondering if you could give us any behind the scenes insight on the decision to pull Snell in Game 6, or how those kind of decisions are made. Did you support at the time? Was the group Slack channel just going crazy afterwards?
Yeah. So for those that don't have the background there, so in Game 6 of the 2020 World Series against the Dodgers, our starting pitcher, Blake Snell, was just mowing down the Dodgers. He was pitching very, very well. We essentially had him on, I don't know if it was a strict pitch count, but there was just a plan. We were going to have him, I think, go 6, and then we had, or maybe 7, and we had the bullpen pitchers that we wanted lined up right behind him. It turns out, in retrospect, potentially Blake Snell could have gone longer, and Nick Anderson, our lights out closer that had been pitching amazingly all year, it turns out his UCL was dangling on his last thread, and we didn't know it at the time. So he pitched poorly and ended up sort of putting us in a hole that we couldn't dig our way out of, and led to us losing in that Game 6, and that was the end. They beat us 4-2. I would say Kevin Cash, our manager, had a very good quote that I sort of go back to. I don't know if it was immediately or if it was in the weeks following, but it was essentially, if you don't follow your plan, you don't have a plan. And we had set up exactly what we wanted, and we were hitting the best case scenario there of Blake pitching well, and then having in exactly the guys we wanted to come in after that, and we were going to follow the plan. It turns out that there's quite a bit to potentially be said about him dealing and potentially going another inning or two. It's Game 6 of the World Series. Like, that's the end of the season. We're not trying to save bullets for later. So I'm not as torn up about it as I think some people are. It doesn't keep me up at night. I think personally, my sort of gut instinct is that I would have liked to see him pitch another inning. But then again, if Nick Anderson comes in and his UCL falls off an inning later, did that matter? I don't know.